Alrighty, we're back again. Out of curiosity, how does this look? Does it? Yeah, 60 FPS. I think we're chilling here. City, yeah, this is very obviously 60. Hell yeah. And I'm guessing I can't go up, right? Right. Not until I upgrade my stuff. Not until we upgrade this account. What is this? Okay. Yep, we got an upgrade on the camera. Hopefully it looks nicer. And yeah, it can go up to 4K if we ever need it to. Maybe I'll do that for the videos. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, for the videos I could always do 4K now and then just have the fuller view of me talking to the camera. I guess I'm curious, do big YouTubers even do the 60 FPS? Gact does. But yeah, I'm curious, like, does the Hank Green do 60 FPS, or is it just not important for him? Oh, this is just the best. So I have a lineup of videos that I think we could watch, kind of all in the spirit of the New Year's. And yeah, there's plenty of other stuff that we could do. We could start going through part 2 stuff. Like, I need to really... Oh, I need to organize a lot of this stuff and determine what I'm missing from my current view. So we could do that. And then on the side here, like during the day, during these next few days, I'm going to try to do a ton of work on just getting more stuff here. Just trying to organize these thoughts in my mind and also on the page. Trying to learn a lot more about the brain with regards to attention. Well, actually, just with regards to the entire array of mechanisms that are involved in allostasis at large. Just trying to figure out what are the abstract generalizations we can make that would help people understand how our attention actually affects the rest of the processes in our brain, and how that affects our body, and how that affects our future understanding of what we're even doing. So, all right, let's start it off with the one, the only, Sam Harris. And I was concerned slightly that this would be political, so I checked, and it looks like this might be mindfulness. So I think we're at home here. I think we're good.
Happy New Year, everybody. This is Sam Harris. As another year begins, many of us will resolve to exercise more, sleep better, and eat more sanely. Of course, these are all good things to do. But there's a prior commitment, whether one makes it consciously or not, that will determine the quality of everything else. And that's the commitment to take care of your mind. As has been widely discussed, we are living through a all-out war for our attention. Most of the digital economy has been engineered to keep you clicking and scrolling and sharing and doing these things in a continuous state of agitation or outrage. And even when the mood is different, let's say you've been captured by something genuinely amusing, that cat sleeping on top of that dog, sleeping on top of that tiger, the result is now a new normal of perpetual distraction and fragmentation. We start a conversation and then reach for our phones. We sit down to read. This is a book we really wanted to read, and find that we just can't help but check our messages. We watch a film while simultaneously scrolling some digital timeline. We barely live in the vicinity of our bodies anymore. And this has become entirely normal, to be elsewhere almost all of the time. We want meaningful experience, and yet we are training ourselves to avoid it. Well, this is why mindfulness matters. Mindfulness isn't just something to add to your list of commitments. It's the skill that can revise and reorganize the list. Mindfulness clarifies what deserves your attention and what doesn't. It allows you to notice pointless and even painful distractions and to drop them, and reveals a deeper truth.
Yeah.
So much.
All right, so where would mindfulness show up here? We have this, the experience of directing attention. Then we're going to have focus, something like focus. Focus over time. What are we trying to get at with focus here? Leveraging focus. Directing attention, leveraging focus. How we can leverage focus to frame the situation which affects top-down priors and ultimately the rest of the system, brain and body. How we can leverage focus to affect our brain's long-term internalizing and conceptualization, broader structural changes from mindfulness practices. So this is where we would talk about mindfulness as a topic. All right. Now, these are separate things that we're going to have to put into the mix. But let's see what Sam's going to say here.
Much of the quality of our lives isn't a matter of what happens to us, or even of what we do. It's a matter of how our minds respond to everything we experience in each moment. Many people think mindfulness is a strange practice that is based on some spiritual superstition. Others imagine it to be a kind of endurance test. You force yourself to sit perfectly still, suppressing your thoughts, and you're chasing some drug-like experience of bliss. These are misunderstandings. Mindfulness is simply the ability to pay clear attention to the contents of consciousness in each moment, to sensations, perceptions, emotions.
Can we get that on a shirt?
For attention to the contents of consciousness. And you're chasing some drug-like experience of bliss. These are misunderstandings. Mindfulness is simply the ability to pay clear attention to the contents of consciousness in each moment, to sensations, perceptions, emotions, intentions, thoughts, exactly as they are, as they arise, without grasping at what's pleasant or pushing what's unpleasant away.
Can I not just get this is there a way to see this? I thought they might. Oh, transcript, show transcript. There we go. And each moment is simply the ability to pay clear attention to the contents of consciousness in each moment. ... to sensations, perceptions, emotions, intentions, thoughts, exactly as they are. This is a tricky thing to talk about. I'm going to put a little strike through on this. Because this type of framing would, in my mind, given our topic yesterday, or talk yesterday, it would not sabotage, but it would contradict the very type of story we're trying to tell with mindfulness. That it's not that you're discovering how things actually are in some like, ontological or epistemological way, but it's we could just say building an awareness for the dynamics of our brain and body. Without grasping at what's pleasant or pushing what's unpleasant away. The point is to make what is unconscious or barely conscious something you are aware of. That's something. Okay, the point is to make what is unconscious or barely conscious something you're aware of. But it needs to, like, this is a tricky thing to talk about as well, because when we talk about like what is unconscious here, it might make it sound like there's like a clear set of true things happening unconsciously and you get to become aware of them, where that's not really what we're doing. Mindfulness training necessitates a conceptualization of how to make sense of aspects of consciousness. Can I write that one down? Mindfulness training necessitates a conceptualization of what you are trying to, what did I say? I don't know, notice in the moment. Of what you can, in other words, what you can notice in the moment. Let's just say that, because the first one's a little more controversial. What you can notice in the moment. All right, without Garcia, okay, the point is to make, but why did you say that thing that you now regret, etc., etc.? Oh, man. I accidentally jumped away. All right.
Are, as they arise, without grasping at what's pleasant or pushing what's unpleasant away. The point is to make what is unconscious or barely conscious something you're aware of. Why did you say that thing that you now regret? How were you feeling the moment before you said it? And how are you feeling now? And what in you is aware of every feeling? What does awareness itself feel like? You don't need to change your experience to clearly observe it. And paradoxically, the act of observation begins to change how you feel and perceive the world. This matters because your mind colors everything. Anger, anxiety, envy, confusion. These mental states make the world and the people in it appear a certain way. And without mindfulness, these mental states seem to define who we are. With mindfulness.
All right, what was this last one? Your mind colors everything. Anger, anxiety, envy, confusion. These mental states make the world and the people in it appear a certain way. And without mindfulness, these mental states seem to define who we are. With mindfulness, we can see them as nothing more than patterns in consciousness. Yo, this is gonna be our year. Hell yeah, that's the energy. That's the energy we want. With mindfulness, we can see them as nothing more than patterns in consciousness that arise and pass away. All right, can I get this?
Mindfulness. We can see them as nothing more than patterns in consciousness that arise and pass away. This recognition doesn't make life painless, but it reveals a condition of well-being that is deeper than any passing pains and pleasures.
So we want to actually not touch on well-being as like our primary use for mindfulness here. We want to pay attention to something like much more fundamental, or an array of things that are much more fundamental, whether that is just simply noticing moods happening or changing in the moment, or noticing when you feel a certain way concretely. But of course, we're going to leverage mindfulness for the benefits to our well-being, at least in part 3.
Consider a simple test for the year ahead. Can you watch a movie without checking your phone? Can you read for an hour without interrupting yourself? Can you be fully present with another person, your partner, your child, your friend, without needing to be somewhere else? If the honest answer is not really, then you're precisely the sort of person for whom mindfulness will make an enormous difference.
Nice.
The practices we teach in the Waking Up app aren't a way of retreating from life. And this isn't about sitting
Is this an
cross-legged
ad?
on a cushion every day to acquire a new identity as a meditator. It's about learning a practical skill that you can use anywhere, at your desk, in traffic, in the kitchen, on vacation. It's about becoming familiar with the mechanics of your own mind,
That's
how
the
attention
quote.
determines what you notice.
There we go. That's the quote. It's about becoming, you know what, this is a bold quote. It's about becoming familiar with the mechanics of your own mind. And then this would be an M dash if I had an easy M dash to do. How attention determines what you notice, how thoughts and emotions can seem to subsume and define you, and learning that you can wake up, get it, and experience the intrinsic freedom of the nature of your mind at any moment. So let me just make sure that intrinsic freedom. I don't think this is an intrinsic freedom, so let's get that out of there. I think that you need a conceptualization in order to leverage freedom in this way. You need to go in thinking you're doing something, and that will obviously affect how you experience the world over time. But like more close to the mechanics of how the brain works. It necessitates an understanding of what is going on in the moment, such that you can convince yourself that the pain or the discomfort that you're experiencing is not necessary to create a cascade. Yo, Moon Girl, what's good? Or Grix, Moon Grix, my bad. Moon Girl X, okay. I think I got it. Without such mindfulness, you know, these feelings can take hold and, you know, define your experience for that moment. Or, you know, in the case of anxiety, it's often like you're just these loops are just playing. Oh, just Moon Girl. Okay, nice. You know, these loops can play in your brain, and that creates like a persistent state of anxiety. And so the goal here is to, you know, if you were to practice mindfulness here, is to pair that type of feeling or whatever is happening in terms of interoception, which is the reading of the signals from your body. So like usually anxiety comes with those signals of the, heart rate, blood pressure, whatever, hormones. And you pair it with this understanding that you are doing something and that there's no harm at play here. So you're able to decouple the underlying physiological response that usually causes anxiety from the conscious experience of it over time. You're essentially, you know, you found a way to like take these two things and pull them apart, and then now you can make it so that when you experience this, these I shouldn't say when you experience, when you know you have those triggers, those usual triggers of anxiety, you can leverage top-down, influence over those signals, making it less pervasive in your conscious experience. I don't know if that was the best way to explain it. I'm probably missing a lot of components of that, but that's essentially what you're doing with mindfulness. You're affecting the circuitry of your brain such that when you have what would otherwise give you signals of conscious anxiety or conscious whatever, if you're trying to, be mindful of emotions of stress or fear or nervousness, etc. This allows you to take hold of that over time. It's not something that you just get in the moment that you think a certain way. It's something that you have to train. You have to do this over and over again. You have to put in reps to change the connections in your brain to make it such that the top-down priors. So, we always talk about predictive processing. The top-down signals that are coming from your cortex can have a significant effect on the bottom-up signals coming from your body. All right. I have a lot of existential dread personally. I'm sorry to hear. You're in the perfect place. Thank you, Onion Helmet. I would say it's not perfect yet. We're in training. We need to learn a lot more stuff. But I'm trying to learn, and I'm trying to figure this stuff out so that we can help people. How do I deal with existential anxiety that pops into my head randomly? It's like I just get these flashes of absurdity. So yeah, I am not qualified to give like a comprehensive, solution to that problem, unfortunately. Just following this topic, I would recommend just as I said, a practice of mindfulness, trying to pay attention, like literally just without judgment, trying to pay attention to those experiences, and like what I'm trying to point out right now is with this idea in mind that you are doing something, you're paying attention. You're not jumping to conclusion about anything. You're just trying to notice what's happening. You're just trying to see what this experience is like, and it's you could try to look where that experience is, and so yeah. Another thing I could just recommend is going to the Waking Up app. I know that it costs a lot of money, but I think you're allowed to. Not allowed. I think you can email them and they'll give it to you for free. I think if you just found Sam, you could just email him. But yeah, that's a huge deal. It's like it's a form of like cognitive behavioral therapy to take on a mindfulness practice with like even just with a specific focus of taking control of your anxiety. Everything feels alien. I feel this lack of meaning and death anxiety, imagining the end of my consciousness, etc. Yeah, unfortunately, that is. Well, first of all, I should say I'm sorry to hear that, but also, unfortunately, that's definitely beyond my expertise at this moment. I'm gonna try so part 3 of there's 3 parts to what I'm trying to do on this channel, and we're on part 2 where we can leverage the techniques to be able to achieve our goals or identify our goals. But part 3 is going to involve how do we deal with our mental health, and how do we pursue a meaningful life and whatnot. So that's where I'll really go in deep into this stuff. But we will this will always be a safe haven. We've got a pretty strict no toxicity rule here, so you are always welcome to chill, and hopefully, like I imagine the stuff that we talk about, will help people out in many different ways. But yeah. The other big things that I know I'm qualified to say is, and this is where we're going to get to very shortly when we talk about emotion regulation and stuff like that, is stuff like sleep, exercise, and diet are just so huge for being able to regulate emotion. So, imagine that same story that I was saying where, with mindfulness, you can build this skill of taking control, like a top-down control of what would otherwise be bottom-up signals that create this conscious anxiety. Well, all those things that I just mentioned, sleep and diet and exercise, all these things help in that process. It'll take your regardless of whether you do the mindfulness or not, it'll strengthen your ability to take hold of those emotions in the moment. So I could always give that. I can recommend a few philosophers. I've studied a lot of philosophy. Heidegger, the more I study, the less answers I have. Yeah, out of curiosity, what kind of, I guess, separate from the like, I don't know, the anxiety part, like the felt part, like what, like the theoretical part, I guess I'm pointing at, like which questions of philosophy are you looking for? Is it something like what is the meaning of life, or is, I guess I have to be comfortable with that uncertainty. Maybe that's where I struggle. Right. Yeah, in my mind, like the struggle with uncertainty, if I were to just speculate, is something akin to just not being convinced about the uncertainty. And I found that by going in, like, deep into the science behind our experience, and going deep into the philosophers that I thought were at the front lines of contemporary philosophy, and that where that connects with the brain and psychology, like I've become more thoroughly convinced of the you could say the uncertainty of it, but you could also see how we have a sense of freedom in that space. So just the fact that you can direct yourself in a certain direction, and you can be confident that by doing certain things, by whether that is by pursuing something that you're interested in, or by a simple example was literally just to go out and start a some type of exercise routine, which is tough. Like that creates a sense of freedom where you convince yourself of not only the fact that you can do that type of thing, but also it convinces you that meaning can be felt rather than just simply there, being innately there. So, one of the things I point out is that a lot of our science points us to the conclusion that there is no like external truth about like the meaning of life or something like that. However, we all are in this culture where we understand what we could do to go out and achieve something or to feel a certain way. So we a lot of these things that I've mentioned are gold mines for positive emotion. Whether that is like pursuing a goal, pursuing a big goal, a goal that you find important, like that's a huge thing. And then the other thing is not to get too Jordan Peterson-esque, but to like find something that you truly believe is difficult and important, and then doing something that is difficult and figuring out how to do it such that it's not difficult. And that's a slow incremental climb. So I stopped studying philosophy for this specific reason. I actually found more purpose reading the biographies of historical figures than by reading philosophy. That's pretty cool. I feel like there's a lot of wisdom in that. Like sometimes you just have to see other people figure it out or figure things out. And when I say figure it out, it's not like figure out the answer to life, but they figure out answers that work for them, and perhaps those answers could work for you, but everyone's different. So sometimes the answers don't work for you, and that's not a problem, or that's not like that's not necessarily an issue. some people enjoy reading all day. Some people enjoy running all day. Some people enjoy being with other people, and some people like myself are quite introverted and enjoy individuality or independence. I guess I mean the uncertainty of existence. I mean, the earth will be engulfed by the sun one day. What impact can I have? Will it even be like I existed? Yeah, my challenge always here is to consider where meaning really lies in your day to day. And I try to point to the way of thinking about meaning as something felt, as opposed to something like innate somewhere. So like, you can wonder what the meaning of your accomplishments in life are going to be, or like, how that's going to affect anything in the universe, or given that the sun's going to explode and whatnot. And yes, as far as like literally, as far as I am concerned, and when I say that, I'm referring to like how I feel day to day. Like the sun blowing up is not going to affect the meaning I experience, unless, of course, I get to a point where I'm convinced that is the source of my meaning. And one of the nice things about a mindfulness practice is it points out how like your experience, your emotional experience of life, or of meaning itself is can be decoupled from these like ways we can think, these rigid ways we can think about the world. So yeah, I like to think of meaning as something that we can experience. We know that certain people feel meaningful lives, and they don't do things that will change the trajectory of whether or not the sun's going to explode. And so when I look at them, it's like, are they wrong? They actually have the thing that I want, right? I want to feel meaningful every single day. So it doesn't seem like it requires doing something that's going to have like a large physical impact, but perhaps it just had a large impact in their own mind. So then the question is like, what do you think, if you were to think about it, like what do you think would make you feel like you did something important and something meaningful, regardless of whether we are a speck in the universe? Like what would make you feel like what you've done is something that you could be proud of? Perhaps I've seen too many terrible things to feel like I can really achieve my goals. Okay, fair enough. There are a lot of terrible things that happen. And so, yeah, I feel like this we could we haven't gotten to this yet, but there's like a huge idea in dealing with goals where if there's a goal that seems very distant and difficult, one way to maybe not even get to that goal, like don't worry about getting to that goal yet, but worry about what would make you feel like that goal was feasible or viable. And it requires like thinking about what would be the smaller goals that can build your whether it's build your ability or change your perspective in some way over time. And that's how I would go about that. Like what could you do right now that makes it just like slightly more clear how you might be able to do that. I just feel like existence is brutal, and even if I go after my goals, there's no guarantee I won't get burned alive in a car wreck. Yeah, that is fair enough. So yeah, this is where for me, I try to like in terms of me looking forward, even though I'm very ambitious and I look forward, like hopefully I do things forward. Really, I go like almost day to day in terms of the goals that really matter. It's like almost like a trust in just myself right now, and it's like what should I do just today? And regardless of what happens tomorrow, right? Like regardless of the car crash, or regardless of whether or not everything just does actually blow up. Like what could I do today that would actually, I'd feel proud of, and that it would sustain me. It would be like, what could you do today such that if the world were to end tomorrow, it would be fine because you gave it your all, and you know, whether that's you followed your conscience or whatever. Hey, Ivan Neo, what's good? Welcome back. Happy New Year. Yeah, we're talking through goal setting and existential dread. the fun stuff. I think that's a realistic outlook on things. Yeah, I don't have any control over anything after that, so it's kind of a pragmatic way to just look at things where, and you know, you see that type of thought appear in a lot of different philosophies. It seems to be just like a wise thing to have that view, and to like, I feel the same way about regret. It's like, if I felt in the moment like I did what I thought was the best thing I could do, then I ought not think back to that moment and think that I did something wrong. It's like I've earned the ability to not be able to think that I did something wrong. So I can't regret that. I can only regret something in the moment if I knew I should do the other in that moment. So it makes it very clear. It's like what I'm trying to talk through right now these are clear heuristics that we could leverage. If you feel like, if you know, you pay attention to whatever you think it is, your conscience or whatnot. If you feel like you did something good in this moment, and this is different for everyone. So like you know, depending where you're at, let's use the exercise example. Like, you know, if you've never exercised, like literally just doing like 5 push-ups in a day, like that can be the thing that you did, and you put effort into it. It was difficult, and that's something that regardless of what happens the next day, you could be proud of and not regret. And it requires being like fair with yourself, you know, like you don't, like, why ought you not just say, oh, do 200 push-ups right off the bat, boom, and you know, you kind of have to get a sense of what would be fair to do in the moment, and that's something we could learn from others. It's like, what do other people think is fair for someone to do in the moment, given, you know, their current trajectory. Okay, should we rather achieve something and get in a car wreck than achieve nothing and get in a car wreck? And yeah, like, I mean, after the car wreck, you know, there's no meaning, right? Like, you don't feel anything. So it really comes down to how you want to feel in the moments leading up to the car wreck, I guess. I guess I'm scared of my lack of control. I often feel small. Yeah, so like when I think about these things, I always think like you have to convince yourself of your abilities. So, you know, for me, just looking back in the last 10 years, it wasn't something where I, like, you know, it wasn't a quick jump. It was just a very incremental, and it wasn't a constant positive. Like there's plenty of days where I just did not do as much as I probably could have. But it's just a slow build up, and it like compounds over time. It's pretty cool in that way. Why not take the former? I've been thinking about meaning in secular living for a few years now, ever since I read The Happiness Hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt. I think I did read that as well. It's been a while though. I don't remember the exact takeaways from that. What were the main takeaways from The Happiness Hypothesis? Haidt. Yeah, I guess Ivan, what would have been the conclusions you've arrived at? I guess since reading that, but also just, you know, within the past few years. Yeah, like the perspective that I kind of have, especially on this channel, is that different people are interested in many different things, and that they feel different ways about what is good and bad. So there's no like one thing or there's no set of concrete things that we can say you should be doing this. But what I want to do is like give a roadmap that is abstract enough such that anyone can leverage it. So whether that is like, hey, you know what, I want to work towards making an album, or I just want to work towards building my relationship with this person, whatever it is, like you can you can make that your gold mine of positive emotion, something that you can work towards, something that you have control over. And you build up your confidence in yourself. Sometimes all it takes is one thing to create purpose for yourself, and then so many things can follow from that. I like the story of Todd Howard just asking Bethesda over and over again if he can have a job there since he was a teen. They told him to come back later, so he went to college and then kept on pestering them. Nice. Yeah, and like you can imagine in that long period before he got the job, like he's just kind of I imagine he's just like asking his conscience or paying attention to his conscience of like, what should I be doing now if I like given my goals. And even though like that's an example where it was simply just doing that one thing, it was something that kept him. So like he could feel accomplished by simply just reaching out and asking, even if they didn't say yes. It kept some hope alive. It kept some forward trajectory, some momentum. I noticed that secular identity is generally just descriptive, not aspirational. And I was struck by his claim that after Kant, we switched ethics from virtue, living a good life, to ethical dilemmas. Interesting. Yeah, I wonder if the difference, one of the differences here between a description and an aspiration is the description purports to know something for sure about what is good and what is not good, and then the aspirational is inherently open-ended. So to aspire for the good life. Now granted, they could have described what was in the good life, so maybe that's not the best example, but perhaps there was a lot of ambiguity with that so that people could apply it to their own life rather than some sort of ethics where you ought to follow these very stringent orders. I'm not saying utilitarianism is wrong, but that we feel more meaning if we can think of our choices as expressions of virtue. Nice. Right. Yeah. Like the thing that I want to consider when we're going over, morality is that I think regardless of whether we identify with, utilitarianism or deontology, we inherently follow both of them in some sense. Like there are virtues that we aim towards, and I mean this in like the most abstract sense. Like, our brain makes conscious to us specific like goals, specific conceptualizations of goals, or virtues or whatnot that we are literally just driven to via whatever emotions. But obviously we're dealing with a space that is incredibly complex, so we have to leverage some faith in the like what actually leads us there. So when we're talking about utilitarianism, like you might have this virtue, but these situations are so complex that you kind of end up having to follow some rules. So this is kind of like what is it called? Rule utilitarianism. Right. And I think people have argued that rule utilitarianism and deontology is the line between those is very difficult to follow. So, for example, why should we oppose misinformation about, say, vaccines and climate change? Okay. Um, I might not be following, unless this is a challenge to me. um, right. So like in my mind, it's yeah. There's this question. So you know, a good example might be perhaps during the whole COVID thing, there were certain points where there was a discussion of whether or not there was game theory on whether or not there should be any deception towards the public in the pursuit of a positive outcome, or if the very act of being deceptive was too morally corrupt. And you know what we're doing is we're trying to maximize some sort of utility over time, and you know but that's a very complex equation. Like we're concerned about public trust over time. We're concerned about whether that will affect mortality over time. But on the other hand, there's this immediate issue where you know that deception might lead to fewer deaths in this short term. So very very complex situation there, where it's actually not clear whether or not, like, which way is right, or which way is even utilitarian versus you know, deontological. I'm a caveman, so I think we should oppose it because it's gonna be a pain in the ass later on. This is a profound philosophy depending on who you ask. The local gas station workers love it. The utilitarian answer is that it will prevent needless suffering from curable diseases, geopolitical conflict, etc. What is a good reason? But the virtue answer for me is that spreading misinformation about hard-won scientific knowledge is profane. So yeah, I guess I'm trying to follow with the notion of description versus aspiration here, because it seems that with utilitarianism and deontology, there's still an aspiration in some sense of either following the rule here. We do not want to do the thing that is profane, and that leads that keeps us in a state of good. Versus the utilitarian answer, which is obviously, you know, you're aspiring towards the outcome, the positive outcome. I think pragmatically we end up doing both of these. Like I think it ends up being both of these things, and we leverage reasons that appeal to both, where we want to appeal to the logic of how the outcome would come from what we do, and also the logic of how a certain abstract move or an abstract way to solve this issue could be good in itself or bad in itself, because it tends to lead to this type of thing. So I like if I were hearing someone say that spreading misinformation about hard-won scientific knowledge is profane, without the explanation of why it would be profane, I would you know, I would ask for that further thing. I think it necessitates the, like, why would it be profane? And obviously there's a long, complicated discussion to be had there, and that's the type of discussion I really want to have at some point on this channel, where it's like, you know, why do we leverage science here? Like, why ought we, you know, leverage the empirical methods of science for the sake of our moral virtues? I agree we use both, but the feeling of meaning is stronger from the virtue perspective. Okay, I see. So yeah, I'm curious if we could figure out, and this is unfortunately a part 3 type of topic, so we don't really have to go in deep into this until part 3, but yeah, I'm going to just try to speculate. You know, when there's a clear rule to follow, then you can understand yourself as having followed the rule right now. But if there's still an outstanding potential for the outcome, then you don't get that payoff. So by following clear rules, then you can experience a life full of meaning without having to worry about what the outcomes actually become, because you're following the rules that are good. And so you've outsourced the difficulty of figuring out what the actual outcome is, and you've also outsourced the need to actually pay attention towards what the outcome becomes, and that could take a long time. That could take days. What if I said stupidity is a vice, which is why I oppose misinformation about vaccines and climate change? Well, I mean, you could. It's just that, that there's nothing like completely obvious about why that would be the case. Like, once again, when we're talking about all these things, our understanding of what is right and wrong is heavily contingent. And even though it might seem like it's so self-evident that something is right and wrong, like, really it comes down to presuppositions that we need to make clear. So I would ask why stupidity is a vice. Like, what is a imagine if everyone was in a state of ignorance is bliss, where it doesn't affect anyone's long-term well-being, and everyone is in positive well-being, and etc. You'd have to make a very pragmatic argument that stupidity tends to lead towards something. Like, that's where you could go, right? That even using those arguments, you don't like arrive at the right answer here. It's just you compel or not compel people. For me, anyway, sorry if I'm taking things. We have no course. Usually, we have no course on this channel unless I'm really trying to get something done. But we just have a lineup of YouTube videos that we could continue tomorrow. So no worries on that. A similar vibe, I think. Right. Yeah. Yeah. For me, I think I would always just try to challenge someone to make explicit the presuppositions of something like that. I mean, and that's not to say that I disagree with it. Like, I think, I haven't thought through all the reasons why, but I have the intuition that that a well-educated populace leads to positive outcomes, and so that's a compelling story for me. It's just that I want to make sure that we understand why. This is where aspirational identity comes in. I think, suppose there is a choice between blissful ignorance and conflict plus knowledge. I'm saying that I identify as someone in the latter camp. It's not an objectively right choice, in my opinion. Right? Yeah. No, I agree, and I think I'm the same. Where that's my intuition, and it is a commitment that is part of my identity. Yep. And yeah, like the thing I try to point out in this document is that we could think of our identity as something that's dynamic and fluid, and something that is negotiated over time. So we can, we could play with it. We can figure out, where the edges of that type of perspective would be. When, perhaps when would blissful ignorance be fine in certain scenarios? Like, obviously I don't feel compelled to watch documentaries about the atrocities that are happening all over the world every single day, and even though that might be one of the most important things I could do. But like, is it the most moral thing I could do? I don't know. And is it pragmatic in the sense that it might just bum me out, and that might deter me from doing things? So, at some point, I'd imagine there's some blissful ignorance that I'm fine with. That being said, obviously, I'm trying to always go out and face conflict and gain knowledge. So it's always like a give and take. But yeah, this is like that's something where I don't think we can necessarily say that's something everyone ought to do, except when we do get to the part 3. The way that I've imagined a foundation for some sort of morality, given the type of story that I'm telling in this document, which is pretty much like, hey, despite the fact that this is what we talked about the other day with the freedom stuff, like despite the fact that we understand the physical world to be deterministic, and we understand that we don't have control over our thoughts in the moment, we do find ourselves with at least an experience in which we understand things, in which we can notice and leverage concepts or whatever meaning, or we can get just simpler, like a story. We understand a story. We could think about the story. It seems like we could leverage the story to do things, and yeah. So the way that I go about morality is like, hey, like if you have an understanding of morality, such that that there's things that you should do and there's things that you shouldn't do, then by your very own conceptual understanding, you ought to figure out what those things are, what you should do and what you shouldn't do, and then you ought to do those. Like those are like the only prescriptions that we really can absolutely make in the document when we talk about morality. Those are things that you should do if you understand morality like that. Like if you have an understanding of morality akin to that. So it's something that we're only able to leverage the person who's reading this, their own conceptual understanding of morality itself. Now we could start getting to questions of like, okay, what actually allows you to figure out what is morally good or morally bad, and what allows you to then do it. And this is where we get to start leveraging everything that we talk about in part 2, which is just abstractly speaking, identifying and pursuing our goals. So imagine the goal is figuring out what you should and shouldn't be doing, and imagine the goal is doing the thing that you think you should be doing and not doing the thing that you don't think you should be doing. Like all those techniques are in here, and you know that you ought to do those things. So one of the things that we can kind of prescribe is potentially learning what would allow you to be doing those things, or what would make it easier for you to handle these things. And perhaps furthermore, it would be something like you ought to build a cognizant relationship with your own, I don't know, identity or moral identity, and something like that, like something where you have to keep paying attention to it over time. You can't just let it go, because a lot of these prescriptions do rely on someone having read the stuff that has come up until that point. But what we learn from this is like once you stop paying attention, you can get pushed around in many different ways. Your understanding might change. You might start thinking that something that you thought was good is bad, and vice versa. Like you have to pay attention to what's going on. Is your document relatively agnostic about meta ethics? What would count as meta ethics in this case? I'm not quite sure how that's usually used, and I also forgot to read what's going on here. Explores 10 great ideas from ancient wisdom and tests them against modern psychology to determine what actually leads to a flourishing life. Here are the main takeaways and key concepts from the book. The elephant system 1 represents your intuitive, emotional, and automatic processes. Okay, the rider represents your rational. Okay, so this is a simplification that I think sometimes gets a little pushback, but I think for this conversation it's fine. Categories like non-cognitivism, moral realism, moral subjectivism, etc. All right. Unfortunately, I have to. Despite the fact that I go into a lot of topics, I don't know topics by name, and I'm not actually like a trained philosophy guy. Grok, is this true? What's good, Dharmadam? What is good? We're chilling. We're talking about morality. All right, metaethics is the branch of philosophy that studies the nature of morality itself rather than determining what is right or wrong. While normative ethics asks, is stealing wrong? Metaethics asks, what does it mean to say stealing is wrong? Oh, we went through this. Okay. This might be the discussion that we had last week where we kind of arrived at... yeah, can I find that? So maybe it wasn't last week. 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we did a moral framework survivor where we kind of figured out what we're allowed to follow. So I would say yes, we have to be agnostic about meta ethics in the sense that like this idea of saying that there is a nature to morality itself. You know, I don't think that we're allowed to make statements like that because that implies something about like the absolute nature of the world or something like that. When in our case, you know, I always try to ground this in you know, some sort of normative pragmatism where, you know, so much of our understanding of what is contingent upon our culture, and thus what we can do is we can we could try to come up with conceptualizations that help us out, that are accessible and compelling and powerful, but we're not allowed to say that is like the right answer, that is the nature. Don't they say you need to talk about meta ethics or you circle around them anyway and you're kind of floating? Yeah, I think it always leads you to this paradox of like, you know, we have to make a conceptualization that is contingent on our own, you know, understandings. So we have to use something that is already not like something grounded in like some absolute truth, right? Like we're leveraging something that we know to be fluid, like our culture is going to change. And we can leverage that to create something that when people see it, they infer certain things or it affects them in certain ways. And yeah, this is why at the end of part 1, we have to... this is where we point out that because of this, we have to... we can't say that the thing that we wrote here, right, this document, we can't say that it's ever finished. It's never like, it's never perfect. It's something that as the culture changes, as we learn new things, etc., we need to keep it changing. It needs to be something that's living. Our interpretive stance implies a central, unavoidable paradox. We have argued that this framework is a product of its time, shaped by the dynamic culture from which it emerged. Yet, we have used this very framework, itself dependent on culture, to rationalize and justify our interpretation of how culture and knowledge evolve. Furthermore, since culture is not static but constantly evolving, we must recognize that our framework, no matter how useful it may be today, is inherently prone to stagnation. Over time, its concepts risk becoming outdated and its assumptions misaligned with a changing reality. In other words, this document would not have been helpful to people 500 years ago, and it may not be helpful for the people of tomorrow. We can embrace this paradox as a fundamental feature. The beauty of our framework lies not in a claim to timeless perfection. So we can't say that there is a nature of the universe. We can simply say that we have an effective way to think about the nature of the universe, and that assertion can be judged and can be amended. A direct apprehension of fixed truths, but in our self-conscious awareness of our own responsibility to counteract this inherent risk of stagnation. We can embrace the challenge that our framework is necessarily incomplete. While it offers conceptual structure to our experience, understanding, and freedom, it can never fully capture the richness of the present culture and the experiences it influences. By its own standards, then, this framework must be treated as a living document, not a final static work. It demands that we continually work to achieve and maintain coherence, precision, and practical utility. The paradox is not a flaw to be overcome, but a necessary responsibility and call to action. The framework's justification requires that the audience can comprehend and effectively utilize its contents. The beauty of this framework is that it explicitly justifies itself by self-consciously acknowledging its own contingencies and consequently accepting responsibility for them. We must be open to dialogue and engagement, open for updates and improvements as we closely analyze the framework's effectiveness, as we come up with new and arguably better ways of explaining things, as our broader collective knowledge evolves, and ultimately as our understandings shift in tandem with our culture. This makes each of us active, responsible participants, responsible participant for ensuring the effectiveness and reliability of the framework. In this way, the very form of the framework, an open, provisional, and self-critical interpretation, perfectly mirrors the content of its message, that existence is a dynamic process of learning and adaptation. We cannot claim a final product. Instead, we must aim to continually realign our understanding toward the standards and criteria we have set for ourselves. All right. Don't they say? I'm sorry. That was what you had said previously. I apologize if we went off course. While normative ethics asks that, meta-ethics asks, what does it mean to say sealing is wrong? Is that a fact, an opinion, or just an emotion? And yeah, like we wouldn't say that there is a correct answer here. There's ways in which we can frame this such that to say that type of thing, you know, we can think of that as a fact. We can think about it as an opinion. We can think about that as an emotion. But there's probably a more precise way to talk about these things that don't have us asserting some nature of morality itself. So I think we are agnostic, but like we're not like agnostic in the sense that we say that all of these things are true, or I'm sorry, possibly true. We're agnostic in the sense that we're saying that they're all. If someone were to assert that one is absolutely true, that they would be wrong in some fundamental way. It could be like error correcting code and just rewrites itself based on what it finds online. What was that referring to? Is there the document always being updated? Right. I guess when I say that, at this point, I'm implying that like I would do the updating in response to feedback where I want to get when we're done all the drafts of all the parts. And when I say done, I mean like, you know, it's just there. Obviously, we're going to keep updating it. I would love to look into peer grading mechanisms, crowdsourcing, some sort of democracy system. I might have a trajectory where we just go deep into like literally we go deep into like branches or types of governance and yeah, just aggregation methods, and we learn how we can, not for the sake of government, but for the sake of literally just like a community like this, how we can create a self-sustaining, community-driven edifice. So yeah, all right. Let me see if I could find the morality stuff, because that was a lot of fun. Here we go. Moral Framework Survivor. Can you broaden my taxonomy of moral frameworks in this realm? And I just kind of started giving it, so it gave a bunch of different moral frameworks, including moral realism. And then I said, okay, can you help me determine where I'm at? So for now, let's play a game where I point out criteria and you simply disqualify frameworks. First, let's get rid of any framework that would have trouble with the reality that people's conscience can be calibrated to the point where they do things that others, and perhaps most others, find reprehensible. So I'm calling on the book Ordinary Men here, which is that, you know, brutal book about how ordinary men became Nazis, which is just rough stuff. But it points out that people's consciences can change over time. Have we watched it? That's good. We are halfway through. I got stun locked around 5 minutes in. But we've gone down like 3 rabbit holes, given what was talked about in the video so far. All right, I'm not gonna read through this whole moral framework thing, but I think yeah, we arrived at something much more abstract than like committing to a certain meta ethics. You know, that was a long Yo, Bear D83. That's a cool synchronicity. I came from watching Sam's video to you. That's awesome. All right, maybe we could finish this thing out right now. Let's see, where were we at? I was following the transcript because of we are going to be like the next topic that I'm working with, and one of the first topics that we have to deal with in part 2 is attention, which leads us to mindfulness. So we wrote down some quotes here so far. The point is to make what is unconscious or barely conscious something you're aware of. Now, yeah, I've already discussed how there's like a slight ambiguity with like the wording here, but that's fine. Your mind colors everything, etc. And without mindfulness, these mental states can seem to define who we are. With mindfulness, we can see them as nothing more than patterns in consciousness that arise and pass away. It's about becoming familiar with the mechanics of your own mind. And when we say that, he's referring to not necessarily the mechanics of your mind in the sense of like the actual neural mechanisms, but he's referring to like patterns of experience itself. You're becoming familiar with patterns of experience over time. How attention determines what you notice, how thoughts and emotions. So yeah, but ideally what we do in this document is we do both of those things. It's like, hey, like mindfulness can really help you out, but also learning what your top-down attention's doing can really help you out. Your algorithms are synced. Stanicore the Manicore. What's good, Daniel N? Happy New Year. I don't use algorithms. Oh man, that's baller. Just absolutely. You've gone to the secret page on YouTube and you click disable the algorithm. Okay, mindfulness training necessitates a conceptualization of what you can notice in the moment. All right.
How thoughts and emotions can seem to subsume and define you. And learning that you can wake up and experience the intrinsic freedom of the nature of your mind at any moment. If you're skeptical about this, that's fine, because there's really nothing you need to believe to get started. All this requires is a willingness to look carefully at your own experience. Here's a short exercise you can try right now. Close your eyes and take one deep breath. And then just let your breath come and go naturally. And then notice the sounds around you. Notice the feeling of your body resting in space. And notice the next breath coming and going as it does. Let attention just rest on whatever appears in consciousness in this moment. And see if you can notice the next thought that arises in your mind. You don't need to search for it. It will appear all by itself. See if you can observe the exact moment a thought appears, whether it's an image or a bit of language, and notice how it dissolves all by itself. And when the next thought appears, just notice that too. There's nothing to grasp at and nothing to push away. Just leave everything as it is. Okay, so
Yeah. So the one thing that I always want to point out here, and it's not to discount any benefits of mindfulness, because obviously that's what we're gonna be tooting the horn of mindfulness, if that's the phrase. Um, the one thing that I think that Sam discounts with this story is that it's very important the type of story that you go into a mindfulness practice with. So this very story of paying attention to thoughts as a thing, this abstract thing that you can notice. By going in with the expectation that thoughts can arise, you can notice something as a thought, and that is incredibly effective. That's one of the key aspects of mindfulness, or at least this type of mindfulness meditation. And there's a bunch of different types of mindfulness meditation where you specifically focus on a emotion or a taste, some or the feeling of, your feet touching the floor, and these stories that we go in with are really necessary for this practice. Even the story of going in and not paying attention to thoughts, or not paying attention to your breath or whatever, and just noticing what happens, you're still going in with this story that you are paying attention and noticing something. And that's really important, because as I explained earlier, what you're kind of doing here is you're decoupling bottom up signals from a lot of the unconscious top down signals that would arrive, that would cascade after these bottom up signals. But by having a different top down signal in place that can allows you to disarm what would otherwise be automatic unconscious processes in your brain, it gives you a foothold for not allowing these thoughts to run rampant. And then in many ways it allows you to direct your attention on very specific aspects of conscious awareness. And that isn't to say that those things were there in conscious awareness previously. Once again, during a mindfulness practice over time, what you're doing is actually shaping your brain. You're building connections that are now affecting how you experience the world later on. And so it's not to say that through a mindfulness practice you are learning what was there all along, or what is there in some true sense, but you are affecting how you think about the world in the moment, in that later moment. So Zen is the exception, as per usual. Do you regularly practice mindfulness meditation? I have. Huge shout out to Dharma Dam. We've been on a practice where I started at 10 minutes, and every day I practice, I add 5 minutes, and every day I don't practice, I add 5 seconds. And every day I don't practice, I take away 5 seconds. And right now we're at 14 minutes. So that's how long I've been going. That actually doesn't tell you how long I've been going. I've only missed maybe like 2 days. So that's how long I've been going. Now you have all the information to make that math. I apologize, Dharma. I think we'll just get into the same question or same topic as yesterday. Try the unless you were, Jacob, when you said that we were still listening to the video. So did you disagree with what Sam said or what I said? I always found touching something warm/cool and focusing on that sensation is the easiest way for newcomers to start up. That's just speculation, though, right? And so like the way that I understand the brain, there's skills that are you could think of them as more like general skills that you would be strengthening regardless of what you focus on. Whether that is touching something and focusing on that, or focusing on your thoughts more generally, or focusing on something that you taste. Like there are you know, you could say that there's generalizable skills there. There's parts of the brain that are activated or involved in each of those things. But then there's more specific skills that you can build by very specific practices, whether that is specifically focusing on certain types of emotion as they arise, or focusing on focusing on motor movements when you're trying to learn how to play a piano piece, versus when you do something more free form and you're just focusing on anything. There's skills that are generalizable over each of those, and then there's specific skills to what you're doing, and you know, your practice can go in any direction depending on what you would like to build skills in. And then, as we talked about a few days ago, there's skills to be gained by having a practice that goes longer than 10 to 15 minutes. And then there's a practice that involves simply like the just getting your mind to go back to your focus, whether that is you're on your breath or whatnot. And you can train that in you know, many shorter meditations. So you could do a bunch of 5-minute meditations throughout the day, and you can build up that strength. Hard to unpack, but the way you use the word story I find confusing, but don't get bogged down on me. Right? Yeah. When I say story, so that's actually a good point that I'm glad that you said that, because that's what we actually have to do right now. When I say right now, I mean in January, is we have to consider what this like when we like. What does it mean when we're like leveraging our focus to tell us to frame what we're doing, our experience in a certain way? Like, what is actually happening when I frame my experience as I am focusing on my breath right now, and what is actually happening in the brain? So, you know, we can consider that. Once again, we have to dispel this like myth that top-down thoughts, the stuff that we notice in our conscious mind, are simply, you know, getting spawned out of nothing, as if like we are the creator of these thoughts in you know, where the thought wasn't there, and then like we made it happen. But we can point out that, you know, basically what we're just going to do is we're going to point out how what becomes consciously aware to us is, you know, you could say like some reflection or some subset of cortical processing, or even you know, more vast processing. I'll have to go back to the global neuronal workspace theory to see what's involved there, and then we could also consider, you know, some of those other topics of consciousness, because that, you know, when we think about attention, we're really thinking about consciousness as things that can be noticed. And but yeah, top-down signals is a broader topic than that. Top-down signals can be unconscious. You can be unconscious of those top-down signals, and top-down signals affect other top-down signals, and top-down signals also affect what it becomes conscious. You know, I think the story of the brain is really like the amount, the networks that are in the, you know, in the brain are quite complex, and it would be too simplistic to say that, like, you know, top-down signals are simply you know, either making sense of bottom-up signals, or they're taking control of bottom-up signals. Really, we're seeing an insanely complex interplay of you know, these signals of recursive I don't know, paths of signaling that affect the trajectory of our conscious attention in many different ways. But the goal is for me to find the general takeaways to get from that, and not have to force everyone to go down into the weeds, because no one's going to want to do that. All right. I agree, Dom. I might use the word primer rather than story. Yeah, that's totally fine. I think, yeah, I was just trying to find a something intuitive, but yeah, I think primer is fine. I know that there's the topic of framing as well. I'm concerned that framing might be more of a self-conscious type of topic. Whereas when we reflect on something with some, like, you can imagine it's like there's a prompt in our mind that allows us to, do whatever we're trying to do. What's the best way to talk about that at, like, the most fundamental level? One thing is, why not study and practice 100 times more in this enormous field before having opinions about it? Oh, I see. It's because my understanding of empirical science affords me the ability to make the claim that no matter how much, no matter what type of experience I have, whether that is because I've taken DMT, or because I think I've seen a ghost, or because I have, I don't know, meditated for 5,000 hours, regardless of any of what I think I experience, it's my conceptual understanding of empirical science that it has the authority to say that, regardless of all the experience I think I feel, that it does not transcend what I know about the physical world. And so by understanding the interworkings of our brains, I get a clearer sense of what is actually happening underneath the hood. Now, I think what's happening here is we're having a discussion once again about the semantics of what we mean when we say the mechanisms of our brain or whatnot. And this is where, we always have to fall down to, like, a more linguistic pragmatist stance, where it's like, in certain contexts, it would be, inappropriate or not to say certain things. And always the context that I try to hold as the authority is first, the scientific context, where I'm not going to say something that might have someone infer that I'm making a statement about empirical science when I'm not. So we have to be more precise in order to make sure that the risk is someone coming away with a takeaway that would conflict with what empirical science tells us. That's really it. It's often said that it's very impractical to imagine what it is like to be at the end of the Buddhist path, for example. Right? Yeah, I could not even touch upon what it would be like to be at the end of that path. The question is that, like, am I allowed to say certain things at the end of that path? And I'm making the claim that regardless of where I am at the end of that path, I'm still not allowed to say that I have some true knowledge about how the brain works. And nor do I'm not allowed to say that I have true knowledge about about experience generally, because everyone experiences the world differently. Now, I could say that I might have empirical knowledge about how anyone who does what I just did would experience the world. But in order for me to actually say that, we need to run the studies. Once again, we are beholden to the standards of empirical science. So we need studies that tell us that after this amount of work, of meditation, that this percentage of the study felt this way, therefore we have this much, we have this much predictability that any one person would feel this way at the end of their practice. But once again, like, that's not a description about how things are in some transcendent sense. That's a description about how people would believe things to be after they did that. So I've been practicing for over 10 years, and I look forward to the insights they arise for each of you as your practice grows. Hey, that's awesome. First of all, congrats. And second of all, I appreciate the interest. And I think, so obviously this month we're going to have to look into mindfulness. And then in March, I think we're designating a whole month for like just learning more about meditation in general. The origins and the different techniques and everything around that, because I think it's that important. And I'm not immune to what I'm talking about, by the way. All those things can be related, but it's really a different field. Well, this is the thing. This is like this is the type of argument I'm making. Yes, it could be a different field, but it's not a field that should have linguistic authority or like authority over how we speak about things that science already makes a authoritative claim on. We are still regardless of what field we're going into, we are most beholden to the field of empirical science and logic here. Okay. Can shade it philosophy or be understood scientifically, sure, but it is also it's the same type of thing about philosophy. That's what I've been, trying to point out here. No, this is part 2. Part 1. Integrating the domains of wisdom and science. We can consider how these domains are related and how we can leverage each of them uniquely and in tandem. As we highlighted, science emerged from the broader quest for wisdom, and in many ways is still grounded in it. The values and narratives of a society inevitably shape what questions science asks, how hypotheses are formed, how data is interpreted, and what conclusions are deemed significant. But where do we get to the... This deep connection creates a powerful feedback loop. Traditions, literature, and personal intuition, including the personal intuitions of yogis having studied for, 200 hours. I don't know if that's that long, actually. 2,000 hours, 200,000 hours, whatever it is. Provide rich, complex insights about human life and meaning. Science then provides the rigorous methodology to test, refine, or even falsify these hypotheses, feeding new, more reliable knowledge into our collective wisdom. So I'm just pointing out like the type of authority that each of these have. And when we talk about generalizable things that might be like transcendent over a population, we need to be very careful about what we imply to be true. Different people experience things in different ways, so we can't, just because someone has gone that path, we can't say that their experience describes the experience of many other people unless we do the tests to conduct the studies, follow the standards of empirical science to actually get to a point where we're allowed to say that. So it's a matter about what we're allowed to say, not like a matter about what is actually true. The necessity for this integration becomes clear when we further highlight the limitations of each domain in isolation. So yeah, like once again, this isn't to discount intuition, especially like, intuitions coming from these types of practices. Wisdom without the discipline of rigor can become stagnant dogma, superstition, or self-deception. Conversely, science without a connection to meaning and value can become sterile and directionless, providing us with immense power but no guidance on how to use it well. And whatever that would mean, right? That's kind of ambiguous. The method of integration we can employ, therefore, is a practical one. We can use the rich insights from wisdom traditions to generate hypotheses about how to achieve our abstract and ultimate goals. We can then apply the principles of scientific rigor, the demand for evidence, the awareness of bias, the testing of assumptions, to refine these hypotheses into more reliable and effective strategies. So, Yeah, when we're on the topic of mental health, like we're not allowed to talk about mindfulness unless we have the empirical science that tells us that mindfulness can help, um, can likely help anyone, right? Which we will find, because it exists or it's out there. It's the science that was necessary for us to make such a claim, or that is necessary for us to make such a claim, in part three. Um, yeah, like that's the type of authority we're beholden to. It's these standards of empirical science. Consider the field of physiology versus what it is like to be an Olympic athlete. They interact, but they are really quite different, right? But you still need the field of psychology to survey the Olympic athletes to determine if there's patterns among multiple Olympic athletes that tells another Olympic athlete that they will feel like that, or an aspiring Olympic athlete that they will feel that way. So you still need scientific methodology to arrive at being able to say that someone will feel or can or will feel something in a certain way. And that's just the standard we have to, apply here. Now, yeah, okay. Empirical science offers great value to understanding the rational material world. However, it seems difficult to utilize when we understand what consciousness is. Well, unfortunately, I shouldn't say that. I feel silly saying that. Funny enough, the most recent video on my channel here, which unfortunately is a month ago, I should put out something else, kind of assaults both of those. Actually, no. Okay, so I guess I would say that the material world. How should I say this? It might be. Nah, you know what? I won't say that. Yeah, I would say most precisely, like the empirical science offers great value to understand the material world or the physical world. Rational world's a little odd because as I try to point out on this channel and in the document, like rationality is something felt, and what people think is rational is something that is affected by your memory and your culture, your context, whatever. It's often affected by your current mood. And so, even though there's this idea that like there's rationality in contrast to irrational like emotions, we see from empirical science actually that it's very likely the case that emotion actually affords us our rationality. That when we think through a rational situation or a situation rationally, what we're actually doing is leveraging our body and our physiology to make those signals of when something is rational or not. And if you're interested in that type of topic, you could follow the somatic marker hypothesis. Suggests that emotions experienced as bodily changes, somatic markers like heart rate, skin conductance, tag potential decisions with feelings, good or bad, guiding us towards advantageous choices, especially in complex situations, by influencing our subconscious gut feelings, even if these markers aren't consciously felt. It posits that rational decisions aren't purely logical, but rely on these emotional signals, with the ventromedial prefrontal cortex being crucial for integrating them, explaining why patients with VMPFC damage struggle with decision making despite intact intellect. So that's the first part. But then the second part is it's difficult to utilize when understanding what consciousness is, and that video does a good job of pointing out how we can actually think about consciousness in a clear way, leveraging empirical science, or at least what we know with empirical about the science right now. But it also points out that we don't know anything like fully right now, obviously. All right, talking past each other again, but I don't disagree with a lot of what you're saying. I love science, and I would just point to its fallibility. And in my opinion, oh yeah, it's absolutely got an unlimited scope here. That's why I try to point out that we're not following we're not following what science has led us to. It's like we're not following the field of science as you might think when you go to school and you learn things about science. We're following the methodology, and the methodology's led us to all those things, but it also leads us to the possibility that those things aren't completely right, and they're not completely like right or completely comprehensive, and they are fallible in their descriptions, in the sense that, you know, we learn something like quantum physics, and now we know that our previous descriptions were not right in very key ways. But it's the methodology that is what we need. And even when we're dealing with subjective topics, or topics that deal with subjective experience, we still have that need for the methodology to tell us what we can generalize amongst everyone. And really, you know, in our case, we're looking for what is useful and applicable for each person. So, but yeah, once again, it's limited in scope because the methodology is so stringent. Like, it's very difficult to survey a lot of people. Also, it requires significant sample sizes. And when we're dealing with, you know, as I was talking, like yogis with a significant amount of training, we have a very small sample size. So it's very difficult for us to actually get something that is, you know, something we can be more certain of. And so this really comes down to how we speak. This is why it always comes down to how we leverage linguistics to explain things about the world. So now, granted, obviously, we talk about certain aspects of the physical world in such a way where we commit to that being like true in some certain way. You know, we could point to a tree and we could say that's a tree. We can say that, you know, gravity exists, and, you know, we mean something. But yeah, once again, I'm making like a argument about, you know, when we start talking about things that are a little more abstract and you know, stuff like our experience after a mindfulness practice. I would love for extensive studies of progressively advanced meditators, but in my opinion, it is more or less a blind spot, and the consensus of millennia of self-reports, I think, is a reasonable standard, or is at least workable. Yeah, I would like to see that as well. But like, once again, what that tells us is not how things are in some fundamental way. I guess what I'm also getting at is like, what we know enough about the brain such that anything in the realm of subjective experience is not actually, does not have authority over how we speak about the interworkings of the brain, and it should also not have any authority over how we speak of any fundamental ontology. But it can, like, it does allow us to say that when you do this type of thing, you can experience this, or you will experience this. You will most likely experience this, and you know, it's very difficult with these types of topics, because even having the consideration that you could experience something in that way can bias the study, or bias you when you go and try to, you know, experience that same thing. So it's a very tricky subject. There's a lot of variables when we're dealing with like self-report subjective experience. But yeah, that regardless, we just need to be careful about how we speak about things, like in a absolute way. That's more or less the logic of perennialism, as much as I understand that. I look up this thing once a week. It's a view that a single timeless universal truth underlies all major religions and philosophies, emphasizing common themes. So am I not making an argument against perennialism? Like, I guess I'm arguing that if there is such a... I think I'm arguing against the perennialism. The closest we can get is that we can try to come up with conceptualizations that characterize something so abstract that it would underlie all major religions and philosophies. But, you know, in doing so, we're coming up with something that isn't actually a truth, but it's just a conceptualization. We can learn what's going on there. Many ask AI about perennialism. Oh, maybe, okay, the logic is you have all these traditions doing spiritual practices. Is there commonalities of what they report? Right. But once again, you know, if there are commonalities, even if we can test them, even if we get the sufficient empirical knowledge, the way that we ought to talk about what we've discovered now is to say that is something that you will or can feel or experience, but not something that is true in a fundamental sense. That's like the key difference here. If every single person on the planet, after doing meditation for 5,000 hours, believes something about their conscious experience, that still doesn't give us the authority to say that is true in a fundamental sense. Like, that is something transcendently true. But we can be more precise and say that no matter who you are, if you were to do this thing, you will experience the world in this way. Dzogchen experiences are included in that. It is quite extensive, the amount that can be mapped onto that. I agree, but I have to ask, who has a clearer view? A view of what? Who has a clearer view? This is a I have to point out the ambiguity in that question. I brought my pasta. What did you have for New Year's? Are you saying today or for New Year's Eve? Because we had a banger party at a friend of the stream, and we had some sandwiches that were delicious. We had some Chick-fil-A nuggets that were delicious. We had some cookies that were delicious. Oh no, don't language me. I have to language you. Who has a clear, like, what would a clear view on what? Like, what are we trying to get at? A clearer view of what is true? And if we're going to talk about truth in like the most fundamental way that we can, each person has an equal grasp of the truth. Truth is what each person experiences in the moment. And then if we were to start getting into some semblance of truth, that is, you know, when we talk about our, you know, reflections of the physical world or whatnot, it gets very difficult to talk about that. But we can be precise, and we could try to do that. New Year's hot tub. I wish there was a hot tub. Would you like me to not use concepts? No, I would like you to use more concepts. The more concepts, usually, the more precise you can get. I'm being bitchy, but you can derail any question ever. Like, no, like, I'm saying I don't mind the word clear. I don't mind clear view. We just need to figure out what clear view we're trying to get at. Who has a clearer view at discerning what? Who has a clearer view at determining whether this what the weather is going to be tomorrow? Who has a clearer view for how this person's personality? Who has a clearer view for if you say who has a clearer view for what is true, though, I'm going to say that neither, you know. What do I think? That's why I brought the example. I think you might be meaning who has a clearer view of some absolute truth, and I'm trying to point out that in the most fundamental sense, I would say that each person has an equal view, and then in any higher level sense of truth, I would say that we shouldn't talk about truth like that, as if someone could have a you know a sense of what is true just based on their subjective experience of that. If you cultivate mindfulness, it is like strengthening a tool, right? Absolutely. Yeah. It is a tool for what? Yeah, this is where I would say it's important to be precise, where a clearer view of navigating. So I'm going to use this verb so that it makes it, it points out the subjective nature of this type of tool. At navigating your own experience, it strengthens your ability to navigate your own experience. It's not a tool for determining what experience is for everyone, but you can now navigate your own experience significantly more effectively. Seeing the nature and mechanics of your consciousness. That's what I would say. Seeing the nature and and once again, we have to be clear that when we talk about nature and mechanics of consciousness, we're not actually purporting anything about the underlying mechanisms of your brain, which is actually creating consciousness. It is, so I would say that they have a clear view, right? Yeah. So if we were to try to make a case that you have that you have a better sense of how consciousness is for everyone, then we need the studies. We need the studies to say that this is something that is universal in consciousness, regardless. Now, granted, I won't deny that seeing these patterns emerge across cultures over long periods of time, I think that creates a very compelling hypothesis. And I think we should talk about those types of hypotheses. That's what I think we're going to leverage the part 2 epilogue for. I don't know if I wrote this stuff in, but yeah, anything where it's like we can't actually get the, it's infeasible to get the study that tells us one way or another, but we do see these patterns emerge. Then we can come up with we can come up with a very precise telling of, hey, these things aren't products of science, but these are products of logic in some sense. These are products of our understanding of the trajectory of history. And because these patterns emerge across cultures, therefore, perhaps they have some utility, and this is what we might be able to gain from them. And we have to be a little more speculative in how we speak about that. Let me quote myself. I would love for extensive studies of progressively advanced meditators, but in my opinion, it's more or less a blind spot, and the consensus of millennia of self-reports, I think, is a reasonable standard. Yeah, I think, I'm definitely down with that. But yeah, we have to be careful about the wording here. I don't think they are really studying it in the relevant way. The brain doesn't have neurons that introspect on all its processes, so introspection is insufficient. Right? Yeah. Once again, if we're talking about the brain, like brain mechanisms and processes within the brain, if we're talking about consciousness from that perspective, then we cannot use anything that comes from subjective experience really to fill out that type of perspective. If we're talking about subjective experience, then we're specifically talking about something that is merely empirical or practical within your own experience. I don't think they are really... okay, I'm sorry. I gotta get some food. Nice chat. Enjoy the food. And thank you for the chat. Bon appetit, Dharma. See you next time. Yeah, hopefully I'm not talking in circles, and hopefully what I'm saying is at least somewhat cogent. Yeah, really a lot of these arguments that I'll make are simply about how we ought to talk about things, really. And I didn't know you speak French. I wish. I think French sounds pretty nice. All right, we've got 1 minute farther. Let's see if we can go all the way.
That's mindfulness. It's not a mystical state. It's just a clear recognition of what your experience is like in each moment.
Right. So just to be clear, like, or just to point out, like Sam used what your experience is like in each moment. Now, granted, maybe Sam does believe that it's just a clear recognition of what experience is like in each moment, but I think it's just beneficial to give that extra, your experience, because that makes this more practical. Like, what are we actually the other aspect of linguistic pragmatism that we could take is, like, what are we actually trying to accomplish when we make a case about what everyone's consciousness is like? And perhaps we are trying to get at that there's certain tools that we can use, but we have to make sure that those tools are actually practical and useful. So yeah, it would have to be an effective conceptualization that we arrive at, but yeah, it's just more tricky. For example, something like Stoic philosophies. Like, we still have to find the empirical science there before we can start including them in this type of practical telling, except for our epilogue, as I said. Imagine a lot of people tried living their life with a specific philosophy, and they, after a certain amount of time, they reported their emotion, whether or not they felt like it affected their life or gave them positive emotion. Obviously, there's always flaws with this surveying method, but at least that tells you, like, if you were to frame your life in this way, you have this probability that it will affect your mental health in a certain way. And you get the control groups and whatnot. You could see that it actually has some change, and we could always consider what other variables might be at play, but we're trying to find practical ways that we can frame our experience or frame our goals. Practical tools that we can actually think about and see in our own lives, and we need to make sure that we speak about them with the amount of certainty that we're allowed.
But practiced regularly, it becomes a very powerful skill. Among other things, it allows you to focus when you want to, and to let go of negative reactions and emotions when you should. Mindfulness allows you to reconnect with what really matters. The point isn't to become a different person, it's to stop being confused about the person you already are. To recognize that your conscious awareness of life
huge.
in the present is the basis of every experience you...
Let's go. Okay, the point isn't to become a different person, it's to stop being confused about the person you already are. I don't know if I'm a huge fan of that one, because I do believe that there's a lot of utility, like at a speculative, intuitive level. I believe there's a lot of utility in keeping this who you already are open-ended. I also think there is science. I think there's cognitive science on that type of thing, on that type of topic, but obviously he's talking about something else. But yeah, I think, like, I would try to frame this. The point is to become a different person, really. Like, that's what's happening physically. Obviously, you could say that you're a different person every moment regardless, but you're becoming with regards to this skill or with your brain in this way, you do become a significantly different person by building a mindfulness practice. And, even with your own self-identity, I believe myself as someone who can only roughly notice things in my thought, because in my conscious experience, because my practice isn't that isn't that hasn't been that long. And so I hope to become someone who can notice, my experience in a vastly different way, in a vastly more effective way. So I would like to believe that I do become a different person. So I don't know if mindfulness is married to this type of description or narrative here, but it's probably not that important for this type of video. I agree with Sam on this one. Mindfulness reveals the present moment and how the ego/identity is often caught up in a story in the past, future. Yeah. You know what? I do agree that's an effective way to think about your experience. Whenever you reflect on it. Once again, I just want to point out that you are coming to the table with some framing, whether that is a framing about the present, that there is such thing as the present moment, versus a story about the past and future and whatnot. So yeah, in my research, I should look into effective ways to practice mindfulness, and what seems to be the important aspects of the framings that we use, how much it actually matters, and perhaps this is going to be something that I learned through looking into the different meditation techniques in general. But yeah, I do agree that is that does seem to also be a not only a pervasive narrative, but an effective one.
You will have this year and every year thereafter. Because the future never arrives. There's always just this moment and this. And if you train your powers of attention, everything you care about improves. Your capacity to work, to enjoy your friends and family, to be at ease in your life.
And ideally, we go into we go into why that is the case, right? Like we want to look up like what is actually happening in the brain that would affect all of the things that he just mentioned. So it's going to be a lot of baseline emotions, emotion regulation. How much serotonin is within your brain's grasp, etc.
Start small. Give it 5 minutes a day and see if you can bring some clarity to the rest of your life. If you want guidance, the Waking Up app is there to help.
Would
And if
recommend.
you already use the app, perhaps you can recommit to your practice now. The world seems likely to grow more chaotic and fragmented, not less. And the war for your attention will almost certainly intensify this year. But there's an opportunity hidden inside this problem. This year, you can finally come to know your own mind. You can learn to recognize distraction the moment it arises, and return again and again to the only place your life is ever truly real, here, in the present. So this year, I hope you'll join me in making the one resolution that can put all the others in perspective. And I wish you much happiness in the new year.
Yeah, there's also like a philosophy that's kind of embedded in here of like regardless of what's happening, what your circumstances are, what your unique circumstances are, there's this potential to take hold or apply some freedom within within those unique constraints. So he's pointing out that like regardless of what your circumstances are, you can still gain some significant ability to navigate those circumstances. And that's a profoundly optimistic and practical type of story. What was the resolution? I think it was literally just to practice mindfulness. I think that was it. It was somewhat of an ad because he's got a mindfulness app, but as I mentioned, I think you can email him and he'll give you the app for free, basically, or access to the app for free. If you know, I think he says if you tell him that you don't have the money and or whatnot. I mean, it is kind of expensive, but you could always just do mindfulness by yourself. You could also just find, he's got a ton of mindfulness meditations just like on his YouTube channel for free anyway. Other people do as well. If you want to do guided meditation, you could also just read about how to do those meditations yourself. And a lot of this just comes down to, you know, your motivation and discipline to just follow the routine. And one thing that can help with that is to make it less difficult. So to start with a lower length of meditation time or duration and go up from there. And you know, perhaps you could play around with it, figure out what works for you. And yeah, it's all about reps. It's a, you know, it's a mindfulness training is reps. You can think about it like going to the gym. It's something you do over time, and you'll eventually see the positives. Seems easy and cheap enough. Fair dues. But where do motivation and discipline come from? Outer space. I'm glad you asked, because that's like one of the topics here. I forget if that was that going to be motivation. So we have to go into that. We got to go into the dynamics of motivation, and lots involved. And it's not just dopamine. It's, you know, we've got a lot of these topics are so closely coupled together. You know, just looking at the role of multiple neuromodulators. You know, dopamine, serotonin, etc. What else? Yeah, one of the main theses, or not theses, but like one of the main themes that we're going to follow throughout this part 2 is how can we make any goal easier? So like how can we make it such that the amount of like sheer willpower that you'd have to expend is like as small as it needs to be. And so you can we did an astrology day like a few weeks ago, and unfortunately the takeaways from that, I wouldn't say astrology confirmed. but yeah, like what can you do strategically that makes the, you know, these types of things less difficult? And as I mentioned, like one of those for a mindfulness practice would be to ensure that the difficulty is as low as you can handle, but still high enough that you feel like you've, you know, done something rewarding. Another thing is simply your framing. Like your framing can really affect how motivating something is. So you know, obviously there's this huge difference between doing something that you want to do versus having to do something that you don't want to do. So, you know, I always try to think about like breaking down goals into like, you know, imagine, you know, it would be very helpful at building a mindfulness practice if you want to build a mindfulness practice. And then the question is, if you don't want to build a mindfulness practice, what would you need to do in order to get to the point where you feel like it would be where you do want to build that practice? And that might be just to learn more about all the things that mindfulness can do to you. And so that might be like going to watch a YouTube. So you don't even have to you don't have to start the mindfulness practice today. All you have to do in order to feel like you've achieved something is go watch a couple videos about mindfulness and then see where that takes you. And if you know, perhaps you learn enough where you feel like, okay, I don't actually want to do this, and perhaps that's good enough for you. But you know, mindfulness seems to be just a positive practice for like us, you know, many reasons. But yeah, I have to organize these things. I think I'm going to save this for off stream. I'm just going to try to organize these topics into coherent, not categories, but sections. You know, whether that's directing attention, leveraging focus, managing motivation, I don't know, something like that, and figure out what should be discussed in each of these topics. Yeah, a lot to do. We got a lot of notes on these. And then we've had a separate whole section for the biological conditions, which is also talking about them. So I'm not sure if this should be a separate major section or not. Agency is a biological function. The will is not magic. It is fuel management and neurochemistry. So metabolic constraints, system maintenance, so sleep, how that affects your motivation. So yeah, I wonder if we should just collapse biological conditions into the conscious levers major section here. I'm sorry, these are sections. I think I call these major sections. So maybe I'll do that, and then we can start talk about our automated behavior. So this is where we can talk about things like habits and biases that are at play when we're thinking about you know, the circumstances where we're at with our attention and motivation. We can consider the different drives that are pushing and pulling us in different directions, and also, you know, how our focus and whatnot can contribute to this automated behavior. I think that's maybe the telling I want to go with. We'll see. And obviously we want to put in tools to like how we can recognize cognitive biases and recognize social dynamics which act as biases. Yeah, we got a lot coming up. And then we still have this our personal context, which is going to go into things that affect each person uniquely. So this is like the big 5 personality traits, cognitive profiles, environment, culture, etc. Like we're trying to talk about these things more abstractly and you know, at the human level with the conscious levers and biological conditions here, but and automated behavior, because everyone can, you know, deal with that. But then our personal context would be something that talks about how this can manifest in different ways for different people. You know, and once again, that can be with the that can specifically refer to how we understand the things that are going on with our you know, experience and mind. Even just these sections are obviously are married to the language and the norms that I'm leveraging when trying to describe these things. So for me to understand these very things in this way, you know, it requires that I have these presuppositions about what these words mean. And someone who speaks a different language, like, you know, obviously perhaps these can be translated, but you know, they wouldn't gain anything from what we're saying in these previous sections. But yeah, that's all the stuff that we have to talk about before we actually talk about identifying what to pursue. So which is like the first part of identifying and pursuing our goals. Then we could talk about how we can go about identifying our goals, which leads us into considering like thinking in general. We could talk about then logical reasoning and rational thought, a bunch of other stuff. Pursuing goals okay, and then we got pursuing goals. And yeah. Okay, what else could we do here? Foods that I feel like these are so off topic now. Biggest breakthroughs in physics. We can watch this. Oh, I do want to end the stream at some point. Maybe we do this and then we call it a day. But I was kind of curious what's going on with physics. But this is probably going to be largely unrelated to what I've been talking about for a while now. I'm sorry. One thing I tell my patients regularly: better to do X, something that will benefit that person, for 1 minute than zero. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, if like 1 minute is all the person can take, then that's fine. And it's good to tell the person that that by doing the thing for 1 minute every day, it'll make it easier to go to 1 minute and 2 seconds every day, or 2 minutes every day. And it's like easy in the sense that it's not going to feel like a burden. It's not going to feel like it requires a ton of effort to do it. Like you just kind of build a routine that way.
This is QS-01. The James Webb Space Telescope first spotted it in 2023. It's one of hundreds of similar objects known as little red dots that the telescope has seen in the early universe.
It's very unusual to find a population of sources where we're just left scratching our head and wondering, what is this thing that we're looking at?
We are all working together to try and uncover the mysteries of the early universe, the mysteries of these little red dots.
For the past 2 years, researchers have trained the Webb telescope on various little red dots, capturing their light across a spectrum of wavelengths.
They are characterized by sort of a V shape in their spectral energy distribution. This is indication that we have gas that is moving at very high velocity around something.
In 2025, a team of researchers confirmed the identity of QS-01, a supermassive black hole as heavy as 50 million suns, basically
Yikes.
alone in the early cosmos.
The exceptional finding here is that we essentially find no trace of a galaxy around this black hole. And it's really extraordinary that the universe managed to make these monsters without much of anything else around them. So this is really a fantastic new discovery.
The first clues about QS-01's nature.
I don't know much about this stuff, but would it be the case that there would be nothing much around them because of their massive scale?
Arose from a direct measurement of its mass, an unprecedented feat for a black hole in the early universe. The results challenge our understanding of how black holes form and threaten to
Thanks for the chat, and I hope you find what you're looking for on your journey. Thank you, and likewise. And feel free to come back and chill and see our progress whenever you feel the need. Enjoy the rest of the day.
rewrite our assumptions about the history of the universe.
We know that nearly every galaxy
Hey, thank you very
has a
much.
supermassive black hole at their center.
Thank you
But
for the
even
follow.
if these are supermassive, they still make a tiny fraction of the overall mass of the entire
Follower
galaxy,
goal
which
met
they are
80. Nice. I think the goal just goes up by 10 every single time. But yeah, that's cool. That's awesome.
Typically, they are 1,000 times less massive than their host galaxy.
QS-01 clocked in at nearly 2/3 of the mass of the surrounding material.
Wow.
So to see such a black hole that basically dominates the total mass in this way is very unusual, meaning there's very little stuff around it. And some people say that this is almost naked, although we see, of course, some gas. Otherwise, you would not be able to observe the black hole at all.
When researchers analyzed the gas orbiting QS-01, they found only hydrogen and helium, the elements produced by the Big Bang.
So it looks like it's primordial gas. It's not very enriched.
Stars forge heavier elements as they live and die. The lack of these elements suggests that QS-01 grew into a supermassive black hole before nearby stars existed, a surprising inversion of the usual story, where galaxies were thought to give rise to the black holes at their centers.
So it's a paradigm shift in terms of our understanding of black holes and galaxies.
These little red dots are the progenitors of today's supermassive black holes. And the question is, where did they originate from?
One leading idea, known as the heavy seed scenario, suggests that the first black holes in the early universe formed directly from the collapse of enormous gas clouds. But the most exciting possibility dates back to a 1971 proposal from Stephen Hawking, that black holes arose in the primordial soup of the Big Bang itself.
In this case, black holes will be the first things formed in the universe, well before stars, well before galaxies. And
I'm
so
curious
they
what
wait
the
for
what the significant difference between those two suggestions are.
some gas to swirl around them to actually be visible.
I think none of the theories that we currently have can fully explain these observations. And that's great, because it means that there is more for us to learn about this.
In the next few years, Webb will continue to gather data on little red dots. But astronomers are particularly excited about LISA, a future space mission that will use lasers to detect gravitational waves from some of the most massive and distant events in the cosmos.
we can go and actually take observations and try to prove or disprove those theories about these little red dots. It's basically like the fundamental, scientific method at play. We've got something new. Folks are putting out proposals about what they think they are, and then observers are going out and testing those predictions. And so it's kind of very fundamental science.
In April 2024, a collaboration of nearly 1,000 astrophysicists announced a startling result. Dark energy, the mysterious force long credited with driving the expansion of the universe, may be weakening. Using the dark energy spectroscopic instrument known as DESI, the team mapped the precise positions and motions of more than 6 million galaxies. The early results were thrilling, but the researchers were cautious.
When it first came out in 2024, there was a lot of skepticism, and of course it's our job to be skeptical.
But in 2025, with 3 years of DESI observations, a vastly expanded map of 15 million galaxies, and 2 additional independent datasets, those hints are hardening into something more conclusive.
When we previously were considering the original signal that was observed, it was entirely possible that a newer, bigger data set, especially one that's 3 times as large, could just result in the signal disappearing. And it hasn't.
If dark energy is evolving, it would upend cosmologists' understanding of the universe.
For the first time in 27 years, we have some numbers, new properties of dark energy to work with. This is like a dream come true for a theorist.
In the late 90s, researchers found that something appeared to be speeding up the expansion of the universe. The observations fit neatly with Albert Einstein's hypothesis about a cosmological constant, an unchanging dark energy that permeates empty space. This hypothesis is the basis of Lambda CDM, cosmologists' current model of the universe. But the DESI results are throwing it into question. DESI measures subtle imprints of ancient sound waves, known as baryon acoustic oscillations, or BAOs, that rippled through the early universe. As the universe expands, the distances marked by these BAOs stretch with it.
And that's how we can use BAO to measure the expansion of the universe itself.
DESI's first survey hinted that the BAO scale wasn't growing at a constant rate. The cosmic expansion appeared to be slowing. Then on March 19, 2025, the team released a much larger dataset, adding supernova observations and measurements of the cosmic microwave background, the faint afterglow of the Big Bang. Taken together, the evidence made the slowdown even harder to dismiss.
It was actually a remarkable effort to process all of that data so rapidly. And what they end up with is about 3 times as many galaxies as they had in their first data release. And the signal for this evolving or thawing dark energy still seems to hold.
The same day, another team of cosmologists, the Dark Energy Survey, backed up DESI's findings.
We're now at the point where we have multiple data sets pointing in the same direction. And so you can poke a hole in one, but you're still left with 2 others that point us towards this evolving dark energy.
To claim a discovery, physicists must prove a 5 sigma level of confidence, about a 1 in a million probability that the findings are a result of random chance. The previous datasets had achieved a probability of 3.5 sigma, about a 1 in 300 chance that it's a statistical fluke. With DESI's newest dataset, that probability has ticked up to 4.2 sigma, a 1 in 30,000 chance.
Great claims require great evidence, and we're just not there yet.
Researchers across the collaborations are re-examining the data to test whether any assumptions in their analysis could be skewing the results.
But if indeed dark energy is evolving, then the next step is to figure out exactly why is it evolving and what exactly is it?
It could be also that it has nothing to do with the form of energy, but it's rather a modification to general relativity of Einstein at cosmological scales. But my personal thought is that this might be an indication that we are putting the pieces together not in the right way. It could be something completely new.
Researchers agree it's a thrilling time to be a cosmologist, and the best hope for pinning down whether dark energy is evolving may come from the next generation of powerful telescopes, especially the Vera Rubin Observatory.
It's absolutely incredible. It's a whole new observatory. We're going to get hundreds of thousands of supernovae, which is orders of magnitude more than we've had up until this point. And that is just going to be a fire hose of new data.
Pandora box is open to kind of try to understand the universe.
When does that happen?
This might change completely cosmology, like in the same way that it happened 100 years before.
It is tantalizingly close to a paradigm shift in cosmology, and that's something that we feel may be necessary for us to really get to the bottom of what dark energy and dark matter are.
Plate tectonics was one of the great scientific revolutions of the 20th century, transforming our understanding of Earth from a solid rock into an active engine.
This was an enormous revelation. Earth is an incredibly dynamic place.
Just under the Earth's surface, the mantle slowly churns rock, driving volcanoes and the motion of continents. Below it, the outer core forms a molten metal ocean. For decades, many scientists believed a sharp boundary separated these realms. But in 2025, independent investigations into volcanic rocks and vast blob-like structures deep within Earth suggest that the core and mantle may be interacting.
Earth's core is full of mysteries. These results have raised all sorts of questions about the core-mantle boundary.
These questions point to the immense structures 3,000 kilometers below Earth's surface.
We see them very clearly in seismic images. There are these two massive regions, the size of continents at the base of the mantle. What we know is that these two regions have low velocity.
Scientists use seismic waves from earthquakes to probe Earth's interior. Because waves slow down in the blob-like regions, scientists call them Large Low Shear Velocity Provinces, or LLSVPs.
We are puzzled by what they are. We only know that seismic waves slow down there.
Arwen Dues and her team at Utrecht University poured through seismic data from more than 100 earthquakes strong enough to reverberate through the LLSVPs and the surrounding mantle.
I'm curious how this type of thing would be
how much energy
useful
the waves
or
lose
practical.
when they travel through these regions.
As a wave passes through rock, it can lose energy or dampen because the rock is hotter than the surrounding material. Scientists long assumed the heat of LLSVPs would dampen seismic waves.
And so we started measuring that. And to our surprise, we actually found that these two LLSVP regions had very little damping. So waves didn't lose any energy when they traveled through these regions. So totally opposite to what we were expecting.
Instead of damping as they passed through the blobs, the waves retained their strength. This told the researchers about the size of the crystalline grains in the LLSVPs. Small grains weaken waves, while large grains let them pass more easily.
When we did some calculations, we realized that if those LLSVPs have really big grain sizes, even though they're hot, the waves will not lose much energy. And when we realized that, actually stuff fell into place. How can you get a big grain size? Well, that happens over time. If you leave material in the mantle, then over time, the grain size will grow and grow and grow. So this also means that because the LLSVPs have a big grain size, they must be really old.
In January 2025, the group published their findings, suggesting that the LLSVPs are ancient reservoirs that preserve material from Earth's formation. Just months later, more clues about Earth's interior emerged from a group studying the isotopes, or distinct forms, of the elements in volcanic rocks.
Every process these rocks go through, they leave sort of like an isotopic fingerprint in these rocks. And then by measuring these isotopes, you can partly resolve the history of these rocks.
The team focused on ruthenium, a rare metal with a strong preference for bonding with iron rather than rock.
We have one big iron reservoir, one big iron blob in our Earth, which is the Earth's core.
During Earth's formation, the ruthenium-100 isotope would have followed iron to the core, leaving the mantle depleted. Any ruthenium added later would have a different isotope makeup. If the researchers found ruthenium-100 in volcanic rocks, it would point to material leaked from the core, likely rising through the LLSVPs.
That would basically be the eureka moment. We actually got it. It is almost like a smoking gun evidence.
Together, these two discoveries hint at a more connected deep Earth, where the core and mantle interact, and the LLSVPs help shape mantle convection, the engine of plate tectonics.
I think these blobs are like big, stable anchors, and we have the plates moving around, and we have mantle convection, but it's all being organized around these kind of two big anchors that are sitting at the base of the mantle.
Understanding plate tectonics is key to understanding why Earth is geologically alive, and why that matters for life itself.
Why and for how long Earth's outer core has been stirring is of central importance to understanding what creates a habitable planet.
Why do we have life on Earth and not on Mars? Mars is very ancient parts everywhere and a mantle that just hasn't been moving. And when you don't move the mantle and you don't have the plates, it's really difficult to keep the temperature stable and make a planet stable enough for life to appear.
Mars is basically a dead planet, but Earth is very much alive. This geologically active planet actually helps us to basically live here.
Well, that one seems perhaps most practical of these other ones. Though, like stuff from, I guess stuff from learned from these first two can obviously be quite profound. You know, like if there were to be a practical takeaway from these first two things, it would probably be profound, and it might be a little scary. Like once we start getting you know, more powerful physics, then people get more power. So we got to be, even though it's fun to learn more, it might not be in the best interest of everyone. So we'll see. All right, I'm gonna call it there. Got to learn some more stuff. I gotta try to see if there's breakthroughs for neuroscience or breakthroughs for cognitive science something similar to this, because this was really well done, really elegant. So thanks for everyone chilling. Thanks for all the discussions. I think it's just great to talk through these things, even if we've done so before. I think it's just good to build up that skill. Ivan, thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for chilling, and yeah, have a good rest of the day. Have a good 2026.